Thank you, Presiding Officer. Clockwork orange indeed, but this one is a little less toxic than the cinematographic version. And it's very clear that members across the chamber are deeply in love with this little toy train in Glasgow. And for Charlie Gordon's benefit, Presiding Officer, yes, as a minister, I have travelled on a number of occasions on Glasgow's subway. Indeed, I have travelled from Edinburgh to Glasgow Queen Street and then by the subway wearing my dicky bow tie and my full evening gear to go and speak at a dinner in Glasgow and return by the same method, without more than about 60 Glaswegians attempting to make fun of my garb on the evening. A reduction of what is often the case. But then the people in Glasgow are gallus, engaging and very distinctive. And I think that is a description we can equally apply to the Glasgow Underground. Polly McNeill referred to the 69,000 record that was set during the last Pope's visit. I've seen that we're going to have to find parking for nearly 1,600 buses for the next Pope's visit, and that's probably only the first indication I have of some of the issues that will engage Glasgow Police, Glasgow Council and the Scottish Government over the months of preparation before that visit in September. Polly McNeill also talked about modernisation of working practices, and it may just be worth making the point to Robert Brown that actually we don't have anyone driving the train on the current subway. The people who are at the front of the train are there simply to open and close the doors. But certainly there are successful examples of improving and modernising working practices that would look there. Polly McNeill also made reference to a request from SPT for £6 million a year from the government for 10 years to pay the interest. I think this is one of these things that in our discussions it certainly emerged that it would be £6 million a year for 30 years rather than 10 years. But don't let's place too much emphasis on that one way or the other as an inhibitor to making progress. Some of the working hours for the subway have been referenced by a number of people. Sandra White referred to the need for a smart card system. This is certainly one of the things I talked to SPT about. We already are using the international ITSO standard as the card for the bus concession scheme. We're extending the use of that. That is what is being used in the smart card pilot on the heavy rails, ScotRail system between Edinburgh and Glasgow. And I have just written to one of my opposite numbers at Westminster, where they're engaging in the subject of smart cards, to suggest that the logical thing to do is to adopt what is actually an international standard, which presents a card which is capable of carrying a significant number of different services. You know, it can become your library card for the local authorities, and indeed it has the prospect of carrying commercial services on it, as well as simply being a card to access and pay for public services. So I think that there is a momentum behind that. Patricia Ferguson has quite astonished me, I have to say. She's wearing much better than I thought she was. I didn't realise she was so old to know the previous system, and she's wearing a year's well. I'm afraid, while I'm pretty confident I'm substantially in advance of her in years, I came to the subway post its 30-year-ago modernisation. Yes, Patricia Ferguson.
Just to point out to the Minister, I did mention that as a child I found it very interesting.
Stewart, Stevenson. No, indeed, and no discourtesy of any kind was intended. Anything I said was meant to be a compliment rather than a discourtesy. So please be absolutely confident about that. Bob Doris talked about the tourism conference market, and I think it is an interesting point. Most of us, when we go to a strange city, one of the things we sniff out is the local transport options, because we tend not to have a car that we've taken with us. We tend to be travelling by public transport, whereas at home we might be different. And I think he said, and I paraphrase, that it needs TLC. And I wish I'd had the opportunity to walk through the tunnels at midnight. I hope somebody's listening. You never know. There's probably a gap in my diary somewhere. Bob, yes, but I have a suspicion. Bob also mentioned governance issues at SPT. I'm not going to say anything much about that. I think we can successfully, whatever concerns we have on that, detach the subject of the subway from any governance issues that remain to be dealt with. We will, of course, keep an eye on it. Now, I would say on alternative ownership options, I'm slightly cautious because I'm conscious that when we change the ownership structure of our ferries companies, we actually incurred a very substantial tax bill when we transferred assets from one company to another. My memory says something of the order of £11 million. So I think while there is something to be looked at there, we need to be quite cautious and make sure we get value for work. Bill had his schoolboy reminiscences as well, and talked about mathematics, a subject relatively close to my heart. Robert Brown said, and I think this is quite an important point, the government has a role in facilitating SPT accessing the capital and not creating I'll qualify it, I think it was essentially called an unnecessary burden on central government. And I think that is exactly the kind of engagement we're having with the subway. Often it may just be a question of guarantors, it may be a question of the visibility of the engagement of government, and we'll see. Gil Patterson loves our subway, hopefully he loves other people as well. Patrick Harvey, I think quite correctly, pointed to the distinctiveness that creates the charm that is the Glasgow subway. And of course Charlie Gordon pointed to the Thrawn nature of the Glaswegian, who would not give up the name that they treasured. And of course fibre optic is very important. Chris Harvey bravely navigated away from the subject several times, but always came back, and I admire that utterly. It is at this stage too early for the government to give a commitment to support the project financially, but I can assure members that we are continuing to work closely with SPT to ensure all the options have been explored on financing, on technical issues, and on finding the best way of delivering and managing Glasgow's subway so that it can continue for a very long time to come to provide a vital transport service for Glasgow, the west of Scotland and people from further afield. Presiding Officer.
Now close this meeting of Parliament.